Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm Mike Leager. If you know the name of any theater from Shakespeare's time, it's probably the Globe. But it's another theater from that era, the Red Bull, that's the namesake for one of today's preeminent producers of early modern English drama in the United States. Now they're preparing for the March 17th opening of one of Shakespeare's lesser-known and extremely gruesome dramas, Titus Andronicus. We're joined today by Jesse Berger, who founded the Red Bull in 2003 and continues to serve as its producing artistic director. He's also the director of the upcoming production of Titus. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Could you give us maybe a brief history of your Red Bull Theater?
Oh, sure, absolutely, Mike. It would be my pleasure. I'm glad you didn't ask me to give the history of the actual Red Bull, because while I know a lot about that, I'm not really an academic, but I can tell you that our Red Bull Theater was founded in 2003 with a production of Shakespeare's Pericles. And the mission of Red Bull is to produce the rarely produced plays of Shakespeare and his contemporaries, and with a focus on the Jacobean plays, but also an interest in plays of heightened language from all eras and cultures that resonate out or radiate out from that core mission. So the history of our company is we've done about 27 productions of these kinds of plays. We've done over 200 readings. We have a robust off-Broadway production schedule, a couple productions a year. We do monthly Revelation readings, which are one-day only stage readings of plays from our mission. We do Shakespeare in Schools outreach program that serves thousands of New York City public school students with several different things. We take a production of a Shakespeare play, a 60-minute version of a Shakespeare play, out to area schools, middle and high schools. We also are working with the Hunts Point Children's Shakespeare Ensemble now on those students doing a Shakespeare play. And we do podcasts and what we call bull sessions. We do conversations with scholars like yourself after every reading and at least a couple times during each production, both online and in person. And we also offer classes as we've grown up. And so all of this ancillary programming to the productions has grown up over the 20 years or 23 years that the company's been in existence. Although I will say, even in the very first year, when I did Pericles as our first production, we started off early on doing the Revelation reading series on the dark nights of that production, because I really wanted to be able to express kind of what the breadth of Red Bull's mission could hold. And so the reading series has always been a wonderful way to do that, where we can do plays by Schiller, a contemporary adaptation of The Roaring Girl or what have you, alongside whatever the main stage production would be.
Okay, I know you said you were grateful that I didn't ask you about the history of the original Red Bull. I do have to ask just about the namesake, though. Why choose that? Why open yourself up to so many jokes, I assume, about energy drinks?
Well, it's interesting. When I was thinking of starting a theater company, I had a couple different names. I wrote the mission statement, and the Red Bull energy drink was just sort of becoming popular around then. It was just becoming big, and I thought, well, I can't do that. Everyone will think we're naming ourselves after an energy drink, but I couldn't stop myself, because the history of the original Red Bull was so resonant for me with what I wanted to do. And one of the things was, a couple of things that I liked about it was, one, that it was kind of off the beaten track, that it was known as an upstart company, and particularly that it was the first theater to reopen after the restoration. So I love that plucky nature, that it would, during a time when theater going was banned, they were going ahead and performing drolls and being raided by the authorities. And as soon as the ban was lifted, they were the first out of the gate. And so I love that idea that my Red Bull would be a kind of back to basics, energetic, if you will, restoration of kind of classical theater in New York City. And New York City is full of amazing theater, but not so much classical theater. And so even when I was starting it, and even to today, there's really only 4 or 5 companies that regularly produce Shakespeare or the classics. And so I and the company we're really proud to stand for that and keep the fires burning for the conversation with the classics that can be so useful in our contemporary culture.
Yeah, I wonder if you might be willing to expand on that a little more, because, initially, sort of, I think you viewed it as early modern English / Jacobean drama. Now I understand it's for a very long time expanded outwards. Long time listeners of this podcast might recognize the Diversifying the Classics initiative, which I understand you've worked with. You mentioned productions of playwrights like the German playwright Schiller. Why these plays and what ties them all together for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of it is just I'm just looking at some of the a list of at my desk of some of the plays we've done in the past. Some of it is just a sense of the spirit of the plays. For instance, when we did Genet's The Maids, hadn't been done in New York a long time. It's a play I really love. And when you think about Jean Genet as a person and the kinds of plays that he wrote, he seems very akin to me, both in terms of style and language and personality, to a John Webster or a Jacobean. So to me, there's a connection, just a kind of spiritual connection, and also a real direct theatrical lineage connection. We know that Joe Orton is another good example. We did a Joe Orton season and a Charles Ludlam season, and Joe Orton, Joe Orton was reading Restoration comedies, and he even quotes the Revenger's Tragedy at the beginning of, I think it's What the Butler Saw, where he quotes the Revenger's Tragedy as an inspiration. And so that theatrical lineage and kind of making those connections for our audience and for ourselves is an exciting thing for me. Strindberg fell in that category, and Gogol, who was the world's biggest Moliere fan, and so there's no question that Moliere is classical, but some might debate, well, Gogol, does that really fit? And of course I thought it did, and I also thought that there's a sense of, with a lot of these writers, like in the case of Gogol, there's a sense of the absurd and grotesque that also, to me, matches some of what we generally think of as Jacobean drama. And I'll just add the caveat that one of the reasons I started the company with Pericles, a Jacobean play, is because it kind of turns on its head the connotation that we have of Jacobean. We often think of Jacobean, well, it's just all those bloody dramas. But of course, Jacobean encapsulates the romances as well as like plays like Pericles.
So, what does a typical season look like for the Red Bull? And you mentioned some of your series, like the Revelation readings.
Mm-hmm.
How do those fit in with, I guess, for lack of a better way of calling them, the main stage productions?
Sure, they fit in. They have turned out to be one of the more popular things we do because they fit in, and I think they fit in when it works, they fit in really hand in glove. They give the company a chance to bring in lots of different artists throughout the season, bringing in lots of actors and directors that otherwise we can't produce a dozen productions a year, but we can do 10 readings a year and 2 productions a year, and that's a typical season for us. And so, one, it allows us to kind of cast a wider net in terms of reaching more, involving more artists, and in terms of the plays that we do. And so I can do everything from, like, for instance, this year we did Rodgers and Hart's Boys from Syracuse. We do an annual concert like that where we're rediscovering, in a kind of encore style way, rediscovering a classic musical or a rarely heard of musical. We did Return to the Forbidden Planet in that series. We've done a couple of really fun ones that as well as a new musical that Maltby and Shire wrote, based on The Country Wife. And so that we get everything from musicals that are in conversation with our mission to new plays, and sometimes it's a commission that we've made. For instance, this year I mentioned The Roaring Girl and The Rover, and we've got 2 new adaptations of both The Rover and The Roaring Girl in this year's reading series, commissioned by Kate Wallet and playwrights Kate Wallet and Stuffy Adams are doing new versions of those plays for us, as well as some of the just core, straight up Red Bull Jacobean plays. For instance, we did a reading just last month of Sejanus, which turns out to be, more, and that's not even, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but that might not be strictly Jacobean. That might be a few years later or something, or I'm not sure. But regardless, it's a play that really fits our time, unfortunately, and it's something like that gives us a chance to explore. Okay, well, we're always going to do at least 1 or 2 of those every year, and we'll always do those productions of those plays that are right at the core of the mission. So there's always at least a couple of those in there, and then also sometimes a new play. Like, for instance, this year we're doing Hamish Linklater's Paris Actors, which is a really I would call it Gogolian, but maybe it's not quite that. It's funny, but it's also tragic, and it's set during occupied Paris, exploring a real life story of a Nazi actor who was playing Shylock. So you asked how does that fit in? It fits in all sorts of ways. It allows us a chance to explore plays for possible production, as well as just go, okay, you know what? No one's ever going to do a reading of, oh, I don't know. No one's ever going to hear Sejanus. No one's ever going to do a production of Sejanus. Well, maybe they will if we do a reading of it. Let's go. Let's try it out. Let's try it out. So it gives us a chance to dig deeper into the canon that surrounds our mission.
Yeah, and you also mentioned earlier things like your bowl sessions.
Mm.
It seems like there's a real emphasis here on having conversations about the work, to some degree, integrating scholarly perspectives and work into what you're doing. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Why is that so important?
Well, we love doing those. We have learned, I've learned, and everyone involved with Red Bull Theater has learned so much from the scholarly community. And we've had the opportunity to work with everybody from Gene Howard, Tanya Pollard, Jim Shapiro, Ayanna Thompson, so many terrific scholars, Mario Di Gangi, so many terrific scholars have been involved with the company right from the earliest days. And I'll give a little credit to a dear friend who passed away named George Mayer, who early on in the founding of Red Bull became interested and really encouraged me to involve scholars with our work. And I always liked program notes and things like that. And I'm still an avid reader. About any play we're doing, I want to know everything I can and everything that's been written. So that was a natural interest of mine. And it turned out it extended to our audience, especially in the reading series. We have a very articulate and astute audience that comes to see these plays, and people of all types. But we always have really robust conversations, and we learn something about the play through that. So I just think, why not? Why not get more information? And sometimes, often, the scholars now will tell us about, hey, Jesse, have you ever thought about this play? And so, well, no. For instance, Ayanna Thompson suggested Chettel's Tragedy of Hoffman last year. I'd never heard of that one. I thought, well, I've been doing this for 25 years. How come I've never heard of that one? Let's read it. So we did a revelation reading of it. So it provides for our audience just a richer experience of the play, so you can have a real conversation and hear about it from the scholarly perspective as well as the artistic perspective. And the way the bull sessions generally work is it's usually the director, the scholar, and a few of the actors who've been involved in the reading or production discussing it for 20 or 30 minutes following a reading or following a matinee performance of a production. And sometimes when we can, we also do those online to involve the online audience, which of course is an outgrowth of the pandemic, but a positive one. Another thing that grew up during the pandemic is our podcast series, and we decided to start offering a free, usually monthly conversation led by our associate artistic director, Nathan Winkelstein, who will talk with an actor or a scholar, but most of the time an actor or director, about a particular speech or usually a speech or a scene from a Shakespeare or a Jacobean play, and really dig deeply into that for an hour in a podcast. And that series become quite popular. We get a lot of listens. So it's again, it's mostly about, for us, learning more about what we do and just making sure that we're always learning. And for our audience, it's about providing an enriching experience around the work.
So we're speaking ahead of the opening of your latest production, which stars Patrick Page as the title character of Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus. For those of us who might not be familiar with it, could you tell us what the play is about, other than maybe cooking?
The play, what Titus Andronicus is about. It's hard. I mean, this is just going to be my perspective, of course. We're a week into rehearsal, and Patrick and I have been working on it off and on for 5 years. We've been talking about it. We've been did a couple workshops, a couple revelation readings of it. So it's hard for me to say, oh, this is what it's about right here in the middle of the process. But let me try. Somewhat, it's about exploring humanity's capacity for inhumanity. I think some of it's about what do you do in a world or a society when justice no longer exists, that the rules of the social order have been turned on their head, and there's civil disorder all around you. How does a rational, order-based person or people react when the irrational is in the capital? You might think of it as a kind of cautionary political tale for how a great society might crumble. And on some level, it's about the scary confrontation for ourselves, like of just how much of an animal are humans? What is this quintessence of dust? Are we really civilized? How do we feel about vengeance? And Shakespeare wrestled with these questions throughout his career, and so did a lot of the Jacobeans. And I'm often reminded of, I think it was a Francis Bacon quote. He said something like, as far as revenge is concerned, oh, this was a scholar, R.A. Folks, who said something like, as far as revenge is concerned, our society is two-faced. And this is a possible light misquotation, but I think he said our society is two-faced. On one hand, we condemn vengeance. On the other hand, we desire it greatly. And we still, as a culture, wrestle with things like the death penalty. And well, you can draw your own thoughts about that from contemporary life. But I think this play wrestles with a lot of those issues. Plus, it's about three families. It's about three powerful political families. So it's kind of a family tragedy. And how the political and the personal interweave in Titus's story is really powerful. And then, and I think there's so much symbolism in it in this early Shakespeare play. So much symbolism of the body, the horrible rape of Lavinia, I think is clearly meant to be what happens to Rome also. I mean, it's emblematic of what happens to Rome. At the end of the play, you have Lavinia and her father, both of whom have lost limbs and more. And the one of the few characters who are left alive are saying, I can't remember the exact line, how can I re-knit this society? How can Rome, he says, oh, Rome, you've been bane to yourself. Rome, you've committed suicide. And another character says, help me learn how to knit these broken threads together, for want of a real quote. And they try, young Lucius tries, but it's uncertain. And so I think the play, like Sejanus, is sadly quite timely for our time. And there's a lot to dig into. And so people often think of Titus as just a slasher flick, or no, it's really bloody, and it is really bloody. And while I've been talking quite seriously about it, some of that is funny. And so on one hand, you have young Shakespeare, and it's bloody and it's exciting, and it's right next to the bear baiting pit. And yeah, we're gonna chop off a hand, and we're gonna, how many acts of violence can I get into one play? And I've got these great characters, and he really takes the vice character and Aaron the Moor and really explodes him into a real interesting character. Same with Tamara, like who is kind of maybe a prototype for Lady Macbeth. All these, and Titus himself could be thought of as a prototype for King Lear. There's all this, but it's kind of all in this young man's play. So it's really exciting to work on it in that way too, and pull out the greatness in Titus, which sometimes is lost by its reputation as being kind of just a bloody mess.
Yeah, in terms of that process of working with the original text and then sort of thinking about, as you've just been articulating, how does this translate to our current day context? I'm wondering, just because of, again, how central the original text often is to your work on your various productions, what's the process like as you take a look at a script and think about, how am I going to make this speak to my audience now?
Titus has been really a great adventure in that, because we've been working on it off and on for 5 years. We had a little break during the pandemic, but every time we've come to look at it, every 12 or 16 months or so, we've had at least some kind of workshop or reading over the last 4 or 5 years. And each time we come to look at it, different things have bubbled up to the surface, so that now, when we're looking at it now, it's obviously very much in the light of what's happening in current events in our world. And I think that's one of the great things about live theater, is we can be responsive. One of the great things about classical theater is that we don't have to be literal. Nobody's dressed as Donald Trump in our production. You could do that, but it's not, you don't have to be literal. It's great. We've got an allegory here. And we have smart audiences, and they can it's easy to draw the allusions and conclusions about what connects to present day. Working on the text for me is almost always a process of elimination, because you think, okay, well, some of these lines don't support or don't feel resonant for now, and I'm looking for the things that are popping for me now. So I'll go through a script and just highlight, well, that really means something to me now. And then I'll look for the things that feel either extraneous or that might confuse, or send the audience's ear down a rabbit hole that is not fruitful for the moment that we're in now. And with a play like Titus, some of that trickiness around that is around Aaron the Moor and how we discuss his blackness and how he talks about his blackness. And some of that is quite empowering, and some of that is not. And so it's an interesting, when we were working on the play in 2020 and 21, it was an interesting heightened sensitivity to that, which was appropriate. And now here we are working on it in 2026 with a wonderful actor playing Aaron, and quite strongly believing in wanting to own that language. And I think that's exciting. But it's a process of, so I don't know, working on the text is quite, I guess, organic. I will always be most attuned to what the ear hears, what the audience is going to experience when they hear a word, so that if there's a word that we can't make completely clear through the acting of it, we might change a word. And we might, sometimes I'm also looking for, from a producer's hat, okay, this is a play with 20, 24 characters. How can I do it with a few fewer actors so we don't stretch the purse strings of the company too far? Although this is a 14 actor play, so it's large by contemporary standards and even by Red Bull recent standards, because we've been doing them with 10 and 11 actors to meet the budget constraints. But anyway, so all of those things go into it. I don't know if I've really answered your question as deeply as you want.
Oh no, that was great. Absolutely. I guess maybe to sort of think a little bit a bigger picture, you mentioned how really there's not that many companies doing classic drama, at least not in the sort of with the sort of approach you've been taking.
Mm.
Um, what do you think these dramas have to offer us today, whether they're Jacobean or from some of the other time periods that we were discussing? And maybe what role do you see the Red Bull filling in terms of the overall ecosystem of
Mm.
contemporary American theater?
Yeah, thank you. I love thinking about that question. I mean, one, I feel like it's kind of Red Bull's job to keep a candle burning for these great classic stories, whether it's the Greeks or the Spanish Golden Age, or the ones that are at the center of our mission from Shakespeare's time, the Elizabethan. As you pointed out, Titus, of course, is not Jacobean; it's Elizabethan. But I think that's one service that Red Bull can provide. We have, for a small company off Broadway in New York City, we have established a profile that has national and international notice sometimes. And so I think that's something, a responsibility and an honor that I feel Red Bull has, in order to shine a light on these plays, remind people of them, or introduce people to them who don't even know they exist. I remember as a young artist being just blown away that there were other writers besides Shakespeare at the same time, and some of these plays were good, and that inspired me to start a theater company. But so I feel like that's a service we can do. Additionally, I think that Red Bull's ethos and style has been to blow the dust off them. We're not precious about the text. Our approach to the plays, sometimes we'll set them very contemporary, sometimes we'll set them very traditionally, but our approach is always not so much to make the plays contemporary, because they're not contemporary, and you can't make them to something they're not unless you want to do a total wholesale adaptation, right? My point of view, and therefore mostly Red Bull's point of view, is that if the play has something to say to us today, then we'll find that, and we'll reveal that, as opposed to try to. So it's sort of like more of a sculptural way of thinking, like, let's just chip away until we get to the kernels that are in this play that really have something to say to us today. And most of the time they do. And so that, and the other aspect that we've been really eager to do more of, and we've done quite a lot of, is involving artists who are traditionally outside the dead white male Western canon to come in and have a conversation with us. So hence adaptations like Luis Quintero's Medea Reversed, which we did 2 years ago, and we've commissioned his next one, which will be a version of the making news here, will be a version of the Phaedra and Hippolyta story. So a rap version of Greek tragedy. We've commissioned Jacob Ming Trent's new play that's coming to us in the fall, which is a autobiographical play called How Shakespeare Saved My Life. Wonderful African-American artist, actor, writer, and as well as the commissions I mentioned earlier with Liz Duffy Adams and Kate Wallet doing women taking adaptations of plays, not necessarily by women from the early modern period, and reinterpreting them for our contemporaries. So I think that's another role we can fill in terms of the overall ecosystem of American theater. You mentioned our collaboration with Diversifying the Classics. We've been doing that for, I think, 5 years now, where we help shine a light on plays that have never been translated into English before from the Spanish Golden Age. So I think, we're continuing to look for ways to do that. We have a relationship with L'Alliance here in New York. Every year we do a revelation reading of a French classic and shine a light on that area of the classical canon. So I think our service, by and large, is saying, hey, folks, these plays still matter. And we can do them in a way that can sometimes generate a lot of attention. And maybe there'll be a production next year of The Alchemist in Des Moines that wouldn't otherwise have happened. And in a larger human perspective, I believe so much in these plays and what they have to say to us today, and these great stories from our past, that I think we're doing a larger service to hopefully the American community, and then beyond if you're coming from other countries. But particularly, we're an American theater company. That there's something we can learn from these plays to help us learn how to live in the world a little better.
We'll post additional information in our show notes that will help you learn more about the Red Bull and its upcoming production of Titus Andronicus, which opens March 17th. Jesse, thank you so much for introducing us to the Red Bull.
Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate your questions. It's always good to be asked more about what we do and why we do it, because we spend so much time doing it. We don't think deeply about it as often as, so a conversation like this is helpful for me too, to reground my own self, because we're so busy doing the work. The other thing I should point out to your listeners, if you don't mind, is that Red Bull Theater is a 501c3 charity. We're a not-for-profit company. We've been going for 23 years, and while we do get some income from ticket sales, we depend on the kindness and generosity of patrons who can make tax-deductible contributions. So it's also my job to get up in the morning and solicit for those. So if anybody's feeling generous, redbulltheater.com is your place, and we really appreciate you.
If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please visit theaterhistorypodcast.net and follow @theaterhistorypodcast on social media. Please note that that's theater spelled Theatre. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.